So, Cook Political Report has now shifted 10 more blue districts in the GOP's direction. This includes a bunch of districts that are really, really blue, actually. And it's important to know that all of the districts that were shifted into sort of lean D or toss-up in the last election cycle in 2020 actually went in the Republican direction. So it is very likely that a lot of these seats are about to shift in the Republican direction. A bunch of money is being spent by Democrats in what should be non-competitive districts. There are a bunch of Democrats who right now are up for re-election and are considered sort of iconic in terms of the Democratic Party, who are now going to face down the possibility of losing their seats. Those Cook Political House ratings are very, very ugly for the Democrats. And of course, Cook Political is just following the trend lines, because if you look at 538, you remember I said a couple of weeks ago, 538 had about a 70-30 shot the Democrats were about to take the Senate. And now that is down to a 51% shot that Republicans are going to take the Senate. I had said a couple of weeks ago that was going to narrow dramatically, and it would not shock me if by election time, Republicans actually had the upper hand in the Senate polling. Some of the candidates who are apparently actually now toss-ups, according to Cook Political, these are names that you recognize. That includes, by the way, Katie Porter. You remember Katie Porter? She's the one who always likes to show up with whiteboards and charts in the House, and everybody online is like, she'll run for president one day. It turns out she might actually lose her seat in California. The 10 districts that were moved by Cook Political were 3 in California, 2 in Illinois, 1 in New Jersey, 3 in New York, and 1 in Oregon. Those are bad news for the Democratic Party. These are solid blue states, and a bunch of these seats have now been moved from solidly D to lean D, from likely D to lean D, or from lean D to toss-up. 3 of those seats moved to toss-up. 1 of those seats, the Oregon 5th District, moved from a toss-up to a lean Republican seat. Okay, all the momentum is now moving in one direction. Joe Rogan said that the red wave is going to look like the elevator doors opening and the blood pouring out of the elevator in The Shining. That is correct, except it's not going to be an elevator. It's going to look more like Deep Impact, the tsunami at the end, but colored red. This is going to be a huge year for Republicans by all available data. And Democrats are freaking out. And the reason they're freaking out is because they know what is coming. And so the precriminations have begun, as they say, the precriminations, because they're recriminations, but prospectively. The big precrimination is that the Democrats don't have a cohesive message. Well, the reason they don't have a cohesive message is because they've done a terrible job. And you can see this when you go through the Democratic candidates. The assumption by Democrats in this election cycle is that Republicans had run so many bad candidates that the referendum was effectively going to be on the Republican candidates. The referendum was not going to be on Raphael Warnock in Georgia. It was going to be on Herschel Walker. The referendum was going to be on Mehmet Oz in Pennsylvania. It was not going to be on John Fetterman. The referendum was not going to be on Kathy Hochul in New York. It was going to be on Lee Zeldin, the Republican. That was assumption number 1. Assumption number 2 was, even if that doesn't work, we can make this election a referendum on Donald Trump and January 6th. People will ignore the inflation, people will ignore the crime, people will ignore the illegal immigration, and they'll focus in on threats to democracy. Donald Trump is a big, bad, orange, bad, evil, bad, orange man. And because he's bad and orange, that means that people will vote against this guy over here in a random district in Oregon. Now, that's a bank shot. Their third kind of line was they'll vote on abortion. Now, this was a triple bank shot. Okay, that was Jordan off the backboard, off the blimp, off the airplane, off the bird, off the wall, swish, nothing but net. Like the old McDonald's commercial. Okay, that's what it had to be. Because here's the thing about running on abortion. It actually is a triple bank shot. 1, it suggests that there are a bunch of people who might need an abortion or are worried about getting an abortion. The truth is that on a year-by-year basis, that's a fairly low number compared to the population of the United States. In the United States, every abortion, I'm a pro-life person, is a tragedy. There are less than 1 million abortions a year in the United States. There are about 130 million people who are going to vote in this upcoming election cycle minimum. Okay, so that number is not going to be dispositive in deciding these districts. Even the people who had abortion. 2, you have to assume that everybody who wants an abortion is deeply worried about their own state's policy, which again, now you got to cut that number significantly because a lot of people having abortions are in New York, Illinois, Massachusetts, California. The abortion law in those states is not changing. And 3, you then have to make the weird assumption that if you elect a federal candidate for federal office, this will change abortion policy in your state. And that's not how any of this works, because abortion was just kicked back to the states by the Supreme Court of the United States. So running on abortion was likely to peter out very early. And then, as my friend John Podhoretz over at Commentary Magazine has pointed out, there's another factor too, which is that about halfway through this election cycle, there's an actual referendum on preserving abortion in the state of Kansas, and it went the way the pro-choicers wanted, which seemed to sort of alleviate some of their large-scale worries that the pro-lifers were about to run roughshod over everything in every single state. So Democrats have nothing to run on. They have no plan to run. And so you've gotten is an incredibly fragmentary race from the Democrats. Now, normally, if you had a successful president, what you could do is grab his coattails and hope to ride that to victory. You could theoretically, it doesn't always work, but you could theoretically hope to clutch that president, clutch him close, and hope that his popularity would carry you to some level of victory. The only trends that have ever been bucked in terms of midterm elections where victory was won by the in-party, the in-power party, are elections like 2002, where the president was, at that time, extremely popular, George W. Bush in the aftermath of 9/11. And at that time, Republicans were able to sort of clutch on to George W. Bush and carry that on to victory. But typically, how the president does is a pretty good indicator of how the party is going to do, because the midterm election is a referendum on the party in power. Virtually always. It's even worse when you can't clutch to that president. When the president himself seems like he is on the verge of physically falling down, when he's run bad policy through the ringer and come up with whatever his agenda is, and it's failed on nearly every front. And so what you end up with is basically a bunch of Lilliputians who are running around screaming about random topics, and nobody knows why they're running or what they're running for or why they should be in power. So we're going to go through some of the Democratic candidates who are in real trouble. And you will see there's no cohesive message. They don't know what to talk about. They are confused. Their campaigns make no sense. And this is why they're about to get their butts handed to them in about a week here. So let's start with Kathy Hochul over in New York, my sleeper pick for the Democrat who definitely should win, who is not going to win. So Kathy Hochul is the governor of New York. There's no way a Republican should be able to be elected governor of New York. The last Republican who was governor of New York was George Pataki. That was a long time ago when George Pataki was governor of New York. Lee Zeldin, who is a fairly mainstream conservative Republican, is running against Kathy Hochul in New York. And by the polling, he has now pulled ahead of Kathy Hochul in New York, which is amazing, except for the fact that Kathy Hochul has no built-in base. Remember, she inherited the job from Andrew Cuomo, who came to kill all the old people and grab ass, and he ran out of old people. And so Kathy Hochul took over. Kathy Hochul has done a really poor job as governor of New York. She has no built-in loyalty from any New Yorker because nobody voted for her for governor in the first place. It's not as though everybody went and pulled the lever for Kathy Hochul and now they feel invested in her future victory. Nobody actually voted for her. She was lieutenant governor. And no one cares about the lieutenant governor's race in any state. Quick, name the lieutenant governor of your state. A lot of people can't. You know the governor. Lots of people don't know who the lieutenant governor is. Okay, in any case, Kathy Hochul is now the governor, and she is confused. She doesn't know what to say. And so she is now relying on some of the weakest rhetoric I have ever seen. Not only in debate did she complain that Lee Zeldin kept talking about crime. Why are you talking about crime, Lee? Why are you so interested in throwing people in jail? Maybe it's because in your state, people are getting tossed in front of subway trains. Maybe it would be that. But Kathy Hochul is now saying, well, the reason I'm losing is because Republicans are scaring people. See, here's the thing about the argument that the opposing party is capable of scaring people. This implies either that people are complete dullards or that perhaps people have reason to be scared. If I told you today that you need to be scared of a dinosaur invasion, you would not be scared, no matter how many times I repeated it, because that's not a thing that's going to happen. If, however, I am running for governor of New York, and I'm warning you that there is going to be a serious crime upsurge if Democrats maintain power, because there has been in the past, and you're scared, that's probably because you're already scared of crime, and I'm just mentioning it. Here's Kathy Hochul trying to ignore the obvious.
Once people realize what we've done, and all he's done is talk about how we can talk about crime, he has no plan. The New York Times just called him out and says he has no plan. And so we're just getting the attention of the voters now. They'll understand, like, you can say all you want, but we actually have a strategy. It's not sound bites, it's sound policy. And that's the difference between us. And that'll be the key to our success in the next week. Democrats focus on facts, but we also don't ignore the fact that there's real human emotion here. People are scared, they're hurting, and a lot of it has to do with this unsatiable effort by the Republicans to scare people when I'm out there actually doing something to literally keep them safer.
You're not doing anything to keep them safer. You've been ripping on the police. You've done nothing to crack down on crime. Everybody knows this. That's super weak tea there from Kathy Hochul. So, for the first time since 2006, there's a decent shot that a Republican could be governor of New York. And again, for the exact same reasons, by the way, that Republicans took over New York in the first place. The reason Rudy Giuliani became the mayor of New York, the reason George Pataki became governor of New York, is because New York was a criminal-ridden hellhole until the early 90s. And Republicans were able to take over because of that. By the way, the same exact thing is happening in Los Angeles. You'll recall that Los Angeles, which is a heavily Democrat-governed city, Richard Riordan became mayor of Los Angeles in the 90s because of the crime problem in LA. I've been saying this for so many years, I can't even tell you. I remember going all the way back to about 2010, perhaps, 2012. Remember, there was a race between Jerry Brown and Neil Kashkari, and Kashkari was running against Jerry Brown for governor of California. And I said to Neil, why aren't you running on crime? He's like, I'm going to run on education. I'm like, Why? Why? If you're a Republican in a deep blue state, you have to run on crime because crime is the issue that matters most to human beings who feel like they might be robbed at any moment. And those are the ones who are going to be voting for you. They're the ones who are going to be passionate. In any case, Zeldin is doing the right thing. How desperate is Kathy Hochul at this point? Here's how desperate Kathy Hochul is. She is about to do a rally with, get ready for it. This is a bevy of superstars. You ready? Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton, Tish James. Whew. I mean, that rally alone should get Lee Zeldin elected. Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton, and Tish James. If you can think of a less charmful trio than that, I will give you actual cash money. That is amazing. We can only hope and pray that she also brings in Randy Weingarten to complete the Beatles of failure. Just solid stuff there from Kathy Hochul. So Hochul is in serious trouble. So much trouble, by the way, that now Democrats are relying on a narrative that Republicans are racist for mentioning crime. So New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy, who almost got his butt kicked out of office just a couple of years ago, despite the fact that he was running against a person whose name nobody knows. He was like, well, when the GOP talks about crime, what they're really talking about is black people. Except what they're actually talking about is crime. So here is Murphy trying to pull Hochul's chestnuts out of the fire by suggesting that it's all about race.
Listen, the other guys play the crime card relentlessly and shamelessly. It seems every election, and the facts and their portrayal of the facts are in entirely different places. That doesn't mean that crime is not an issue. It doesn't mean that we're not focused on it. But I will just say in New Jersey this year, violent crimes, shooting, homicides are all down meaningfully between something like 15 and 30%. We invest deeply, not just here, but as a party in the relations between law enforcement and the communities they serve. We invest in law enforcement. So they're really good at playing the card. It reminds me, frankly, it goes back to Nixon's Southern strategy. It's got racial elements to it. Let's just call that for what it is.
It's got racial elements, all the rest. Okay, maybe everybody's worried about crime because under your tutelage, your state has gotten worse on crime. My favorite thing is to play statistical tricks with baselines. Like, the crime rate went down from last year. Oh, you mean after it dramatically spiked in 2020 and 2021, it went down in 2022? I'm shocked. That means you're doing an amazing job. It's like when Joe Biden says, the inflation rate is actually down now. Oh, you mean from the historic highs that it was at last month? It's down slightly? Golf clap for you, sir. Same thing with regard to gas prices. He'll be like, gas prices are down 30%. And say, well, not from when you were president. They might be down from the summer when they are at the highest prices they have ever been in the history of humanity, but they are up rather largely from when you took office. But this is the game. Play games with the baseline. So it's not just the New York governor who's in serious trouble right here. It's also John Fetterman over in Pennsylvania. This race quickly turned into a referendum on whether you think John Fetterman is capable of actually performing the job due to the fact that he had a debilitating stroke he's not fully recovered from. So John Fetterman is out there trying to blame Trump's tax cuts for inflation, which is hilarious on its face because the Trump tax cuts were passed in, I believe, 2017. Just as a matter of policy, this is incredibly dumb. But the bigger problem, of course, is that John Fetterman is not capable of actually explaining his positions, not just philosophically, but I mean physically. So here is John Fetterman, the candidate for Pennsylvania Senate, who has now dropped behind Dr. Oz in the polls.
What do you think the biggest cause of inflation is? And should the Biden administration be doing more?
No, I just do. I think that simply is also, let's talk about the trillions in massive tax cuts to the corporate tax structure as well. True. Trillions of dollars that have added to the deficit, and now they still want to support those as well. True.
I like Don Lemon sitting there pretending he understands what in the hell John Fetterman is saying right there. No one knows what John Fetterman is saying because that wasn't incomprehensible English. So yes, that is a problem too. Alrighty, guys, the rest of the show is continuing now. The New York Times is fighting mad that Trevor Noah is leaving the air, but that people watch this show. Yeah, that's actually a thing. Plus, Greta Thunberg is very outraged, but not just at the environment. She's also outraged at capitalism. We'll get to that. If you're not a member, click the link in the description and join us.